As we are coming to the end of our liturgical year, with Advent just around the corner, the themes of the Gospels will deal with the kingdom that is to come. And in today's Gospel, where the Sadducees don't believe in a resurrection or a kingdom that is to come, they ask a question that shows their misunderstanding of the concept. And it's interesting that the context in which they express that misunderstanding is the context of marriage. Jesus never really answers their question, but merely points out their misunderstanding. But interestingly enough, this is not the only time the subject of marriage comes up in the Gospels alone. We see it in the Old Testament and certainly in the New Testament, the letters of Paul and so on. We have dynamic images of the bride of the Lamb marrying the Lamb in the book of Revelation, symbolizing the marriage relationship between Christ and His bride, the church, which is what the sacrament of marriage is meant to symbolize and evangelize, is Christ's great love for His people, and the husband and the wife sacramentalize and symbolize the love of Christ for His church. But Jesus, in the Gospels, addresses the subject no less than 3 times. 3 times He talks about marriage, which has become one of the great sacraments of the church. One of the times is today's Gospel, in which the Sadducees seek to relate it to the kingdom that is to come, and Jesus points out their misunderstanding. But the other 2 also deal with a misunderstanding or a mispractice of marriage that was common to the people of the time. The second one is a question of the permanence of marriage, in which Moses is also quoted. They say, "Can you write a bill of divorce?" and even point out that Moses allowed for it. It's in the law. To which Jesus said, well, it's in the law because of your stubbornness and hardness of heart. But God's intention from the very beginning was that a man leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife. The 2 become one, and what God has joined, no one can separate. And in that particular issue, he speaks to the misunderstanding of the permanent nature of marriage. Death till one parts. In the third, he speaks of the laws regarding marriage and who it really applies to. He takes an interesting angle at it where he simply says, there are those who marry and are given in marriage. There are those who have renounced marriage for the sake of the kingdom, and there are those who are made incapable of marriage from their birth. Then he says, let those who can accept this teaching accept it. And he doesn't mean it in terms of, well, I don't like that teaching, so I don't accept it, so I'm going to ignore it. What he means is, marriage is a calling and a vocation. In this day and age, we like to think of it as a legal or constitutional right. But Jesus talks of marriage as a calling and a vocation that not everyone has, starting with your priest up here. And we as a people of faith and followers of Christ don't see marriage in legalistic terms. We understand it as a vocation, a calling that has a sacrament that blesses it and that goes with it because it reflects that relationship between Christ and His church. So in 3 places, Jesus addresses misunderstandings with regard to marriage. And that has been incorporated with all the other writings in the Scriptures to the sacrament we celebrate and the vocation that so many within our community are called to live, to bear witness to that love that Christ has for His church. Well, things haven't changed much over the centuries. And as we all know, marriage has become a very hot topic even today. Even more so during political seasons such as we see this weekend. So I figured, let's give ourselves a break. Rather than address the moral issues, which I think you know, the sacramental issues, which I think you know, the teachings of the church, which I think you know, or even tackle the misunderstandings that we see in the political and social realm, which we've all heard of. And let's face it, the weekend before an election, we tend to be a little antsy on that subject. I figure let's just look at it from the simple point of grammar. I won't bring in morality, who's going to heaven, who's going to hell, who's moral, who's immoral. I'll even leave God out of it. Let's talk about it in simple English grammar and word usage. There was a time in which I was speaking to someone who's on the other spectrum of marriage from the church. And of course, they can often be very defiant and very, in your face. And then I asked them a simple question. I said, well, can you give me a definition for marriage? Suddenly they became very defensive and very uncomfortable. It's interesting. They're very defiant, but once you ask them a question, they get very uncomfortable and start beating around the bush. And after 10 long minutes, they answered my question. And they said, marriage is a committed relationship between two people who love each other. To which I said, okay, that's all well and good, but how about when we use it in such context as this? Marriage, opera, is a marriage of theater and music. An ice sculpture of a glacier is a marriage of subject and medium. Heck, we're people of faith. Christ's salvation was a marriage of heaven and earth. Some great buildings are a marriage of architecture and sculpture. I said, where's the love relationship in all four of those? And of course, that person couldn't answer that question, but those are other contexts in which we use the word marriage. Now, on the one hand, one might say, well, in Webster's dictionary, the definition of marriage includes a same-sex relationship, a same-gender relationship. And that's all well and good. But there are also other words in which Webster's dictionary includes very condescending definitions. So if they want to play the dictionary game, we can give examples of other words, including the word gay, which has multiple definitions, one of which is a very condescending word with definition, which I won't give because I don't want to insult anyone's sensibilities here. But when we were young and going to school, we learned grammar. How many here remember learning about context clues? Don't everyone raise your hands at once. And of course, context clues. You can glean a definition of a word based on how you use it. And in the examples I gave, we see opera is not a marriage of music and music, or theater and theater. It's a marriage of music and theater. Christ's salvation is not a marriage of heaven with heaven, or earth with earth. It's a marriage of heaven and earth. The word marriage, when it is used, is always the word used to connote a complementary joining of two things that are not the same. Theater and music, heaven and earth. What was the other one I used? Architecture and sculpture, subject and medium. That's when we use the word marriage. And that is the context in which marriage is used, a complementary joining of two things that are not the same. Now we have Webster's dictionary, which now includes a definition which pretty much changes it to mean marriage is a joining of things that are not the same, unless it's a marriage of things that are the same, which grammatically does not make too much sense. That's kind of like saying a leg is the limb on which an animal walks, or the backside of a snake. Because you see, snakes aren't born with legs. That's the way God made them. But it's not fair that they don't have legs. They should be allowed to have legs. And because I'm open-minded, I'm not snakophobic, and I believe in limb equality, let's redefine leg to include snakes. So now a leg has the definition, the backside of a snake. So now I feel good. We've included snakes in the definition of legs. It's the limb that animals walk on, or the backside of a snake. That doesn't make too much sense. But that's what we've done with the word marriage. So what does it all have to do with regard to people of faith? The witness we are called to give as a sacramental people, as evangelists of the love of Christ for His church, defending the family and the unit in which children are raised and prepared to be responsible members of society, and especially responsible and faithful members of the church. An institution that is designed to prepare a next generation for the faith and for society. What does this mean for us as people of faith? Well, it's important to remember, as some of you have heard me make reference to in the last few weeks, ours is a very strong history of building Western civilization, building universities. We pioneered the hospital system, the educational system. Ours is a faith of great intelligence. In teaching and in preaching, words mean things. We don't flippantly redefine words in order to suit our own fancy, any more than we flippantly change teachings of the church to suit our own fancy. We're called to be faithful not only to our faith, to the institutions of that faith, to the sacraments of that faith, but how we communicate that as a matter of language, whether it's English, Spanish, Latin, Swahili, Tagalog. And as we continue to move forward as witnesses in a society that, like we see in today's gospel and other places, have many misunderstandings regarding aspects of our faith, let us be true to how we understand that, how we understand marriage, how we teach marriage, how we live the sacrament of marriage, how we bear witness to that great sacrament of Christ's love for His church, which is not a right, but a calling that not everyone has. But those who do have really need our support, really need our prayers, and of course those among us who can at least boast, if not humbly acknowledge, a life of marriage of 50 years, 60 years. They truly need our congratulations, our gratitude, and our acknowledgement of the great witness they have to this sacrament between a man and a woman, a vocation for life, and a great witness to God's love for His people.